here with all of you again. Thank you for joining me for this session where we're going to explore how responsibility is fostered and encouraged in Montessori. First, before we jump in, I want to share some details that define me as the host and the creator of this presentation for any of you who may not have been able to join one of my previous classes. So my name is Heather White. I'm a former Montessori classroom teacher, administrator, and in-home caregiver with nearly, actually it's a little over now, 15 years of experience in the world of Montessori and education. I currently work as an educational consultant, an instructional guide for adult learners who are working to receive their certification through the Center for Guided Montessori Studies. And I'm a blog writer and content creator for several different organizations, including the American Montessori Society, Guide and Grow, and Miro's Toys. I hold certifications from the American Montessori Society in the 3 to 6 and 6 to 9 age groups, and I've also taught in the 9 to 12 room as well. I have a master's degree in education with a concentration in Montessori studies and an education specialist degree in school psychology. I'm also a nationally certified school psychologist. So today we're going to take a look at how the Montessori pedagogy and philosophy really fosters and promotes responsibility. During our time together today, if you have some questions, please feel free to use the raise hand feature or to add your questions and comments in the chat, and I'll check those periodically as well. So during today's session, we're going to cover a range of topics. We'll start with exploring what responsibility is. Then we'll take a look at the responsibilities of a Montessori student, how you can develop self-discipline through those responsibilities, the power of offering choices and how that promotes and fosters responsibility, what responsibility looks like in an elementary age child specifically, and how that's a little bit different than in that 0 to 3 and 3 to 6 age range, the impact of removing those choices on responsibility, the power of giving the child the gift of time, and then we're going to end with exploring some additional resources if you want to learn a little bit more. So let's go ahead and get started. I wanted to start, as I often do, with a quote from Dr. Maria Montessori. I love being inspired by her words. And this is a quote that relates to responsibility. She once said, "The greatest gifts we can give our children are the roots of responsibility and the wings of independence." So considering those words of wisdom from Dr. Montessori, I'd like to pause for just a moment. We won't take too long here, but I'd like to pause for just a second and ask you all, in your opinion, what you believe responsibility is. What does responsibility look like for a child or in a child? Think about that 0 to 6 age range, that first plane of development Dr. Montessori talks about, or maybe the elementary or adolescent child. What does responsibility look like in children those ages? Feel free to add your thoughts here to the chat or use the raise hand feature. We'll just take a couple minutes to think about that before we jump in and really take a close look at what responsibility is according to Dr. Montessori. And if you want to just kind of reflect to yourself, right? I know as we're getting started, some of us are a little shy to volunteer. In case anyone's typing, I will give us just a moment. I really love thinking about that quote that I shared. It's why I chose to begin with that, because to me, responsibility is that root. It's what grounds us as human beings, and the same is said for children, right? Whether we're adults or children, this responsibility is what provides us this solid foundation. It's really what grounds us and offers us this basis from which we can grow and flourish and blossom. Do you see a note here in the chat? Get knowledge. Yeah, responsibility is a I think that relates to what I was just saying, right? Responsibility is that basis, that foundation that allows us and allows children to then seek knowledge, to gain new knowledge. Absolutely. Let's go ahead and move forward and see what Dr. Montessori has to say about responsibility. If you do want to add some thoughts, please feel free to pop those in the chat and I will revisit that as well. So one of the first things that a child learns upon entering a Montessori classroom is the unspoken relationship between freedom and responsibility. Sometimes Montessorians and Dr. Montessori herself use the term liberty as opposed to freedoms. And there's some debate in the world of Montessori of whether those are the same or different, but just know you will sometimes see the term liberty as well. In 1964, Dr. Montessori wrote, "Discipline must come through liberty." And she also said, when he, or the child, is master of himself and then can therefore regulate his own conduct, is when it shall be necessary to follow some rule of life. So a common misconception, and if you were here a couple weeks ago, we did some myth busting related to Montessori and talked about some of those misconceptions and misunderstandings. So a common one about Montessori classrooms is that children just have this freedom to run about and do as they please all of the time. This is actually quite opposite of what happens in a Montessori classroom if it's being run with fidelity to the method itself. If you've spent some time in a Montessori classroom, you'll start to sense this calm and harmonious way that the children are interacting with one another, with the adults in the classroom, and also with the physical environment. It's this prepared environment that they're in, or the way that the classroom itself is intentionally designed to meet the child's physical, emotional, academic, and social needs that really help children make good choices, both for themselves and for the good of the group as a whole, and the good of the environment. And when I say environment, I'm not just talking about the natural environment, right? The outdoor world, but also that classroom space. In the Montessori community, we talk about that as the prepared environment. So by allowing children this responsibility to choose how they interact with this space that's been carefully designed for them, we are able to teach them naturally and organically about boundaries and about their relationship with free will. And it's in this way that they really start to develop this understanding of the concept of freedom within limits. I see some notes here in the chat. Responsibility is what we should do, and it helps us to overcome the challenges we face. Absolutely, that grounding, that foundation, right? Responsibility is taking ownership for your actions, good or bad. Yeah, this sense of personal responsibility, of taking ownership of the decisions that you make and your actions. Absolutely. Taking charge of doing specific things by yourself and as directed by an authority to create discipline, self-control, self-worth, in individuals as their character and mindset is created and molded to maturity. Beautifully said, Jeanette. Thank you for sharing. So in a Montessori classroom, children have the following responsibilities. And these are often what are known as the ground rules or the classroom rules. And a lot of traditional classroom environments, there are quite a few rules that are established, right? In Montessori, we like to keep it kind of simple. And we usually stick to what we call the 3 R's, which are these responsibilities. And we like that to use that term instead of rules because just like you all are saying, we want children to internalize it. We want it to be this personal responsibility that they feel to take ownership of these things. So the first is responsibility for the self. This is the idea that students are responsible for managing their own time, for managing the way they interact with others, and managing the way they interact with their environment. They're responsible for their belongings, for the words that they use, and all of the choices that they make. It's at this age, it's typically in that 3 to 6 age range when they first enter a Montessori classroom, that children start to learn about cause and effect because of this responsibility for self. They start to understand, if I do this, then this happens. If I do that, then that happens. And it's this logical chain of events that helps them start to predict what cause or what things that they do lead to what effect. And eventually, then they start to develop this inner sense of what pathways will lead to what results, what actions they need to take to achieve certain results that they are desiring. The second responsibility is the responsibility for the environment. Children in a Montessori classroom develop this responsibility for their immediate environment, both at home and in the school setting. And then they also develop this abstract sense of responsibility for the environment at large, right? We're looking at the global community, right? And their responsibility of how they relate to and impact the world as a whole. And this is through lots of different things that happen in the classroom. How to care for the environment with practical life activities. If you were here several weeks ago, we had a class on practical life activities, which are things like plant and animal care, classroom jobs. They really help children understand how to keep the environment clean and pristine. And then they're also developing this understanding that the earth has these limited resources, and they've developed this appreciation and this understanding of the beauty of these natural organic resources. We try to use a lot of natural materials in the classroom, like woods and glass, ceramics, in place of plastic, because they give this rich sensorial experience, and that helps the children develop this deep reverence and care for the wider world around them. I think I'm just going to stop my share for just a moment. I'm not able to kind of remove, it looks like maybe somebody accidentally made some little marks here on the screen. So just give me 1 second. I'm going to stop my share and then reshare again, because I'm not able to remove those. Make sure you all are able to see everything clearly. Okay, there we go. And the third responsibility here, the third R, is responsibility for others, or responsibility within society. So especially as a child enters the elementary classroom, where they really are focusing on social interaction. Again, several weeks ago at this point, I hosted a class on Montessori sensitive periods, which are a time where a child has a heightened ability to gain a new skill or to master some skill, to gain new knowledge. So at the elementary level, children have this sensitive period for socialization, for social interactions, for understanding their place in the world. So elementary students are not only interacting within that classroom community, but they're also interacting with the wider community beyond their home and classroom walls. They start to learn how to be a responsible community member through things like field trips, and in Montessori, what we call going out experiences, which is actually where the child helps plan these things based on their own interests. So let's say the child was researching dolphins and had an interest in dolphins. They would do some research and find a local aquarium, and then call the aquarium and set up a visit for themselves. So that's kind of the difference between a going out experience and a field trip, which is typically planned by the guide or the teacher, and the entire classroom participates. So it's in these experiences, field trips, going out experiences, even community service opportunities are a big part of the Montessori elementary and adolescent curriculum for Montessori. And during these times, children are exercising grace and courtesy, which is what is referred to in Montessori as like these basic social skills. And when they're interacting with strangers out in these community settings. So the freedom and responsibility then that they're learning in the classroom, and how to communicate and be respectful and responsible in their interactions with others, then translates and generalizes, applying to these situations outside of the classroom as well. Oh, let's see. Sandra, go ahead. Having some trouble hearing you. It looks like you're not muted, but I'm not able to hear.
Sandra, if you want to ask a question, please double check the icon for your microphone so that you would eventually turn your microphone on, in which case we'll be able to hear you correctly. Sandra. No, we're not getting any sound from Sandra, unfortunately.
Well, Sandra, if you're able to turn your microphone on, please feel free to raise your hand again, or maybe pop your question or thought in the chat. So typically, children are kind of given punishments and rewards by the adults in their lives, their parents, their caregivers, their teachers, administrators, even, heads of school, principals. And these are external motivators for a child's decisions and their behavior. And when those aren't there, there isn't anything to continue motivating the child. So the goal is to help the child develop self-discipline. And this is really a process that takes a lot of time and a lot of modeling. It emerges in this environment of freedom, that prepared environment we talked about, where we're giving children these freedom within limits. And if they don't have that freedom, then they're not being offered these opportunities to practice. So in Montessori theory, freedom and self-discipline are two sides of the same coin. The person or the child who is self-disciplined is also able to be responsible in their actions. The person who's free to act, right, that freedom to do as one pleases, must be self-disciplined in order to use that freedom responsibly. So they go hand in hand. And the long-term goal in regards to freedom in the classroom is developing this self-disciplined adult who's able to function independently while at the same time being a respectful, responsible member of a group. Did see some hands, but it looks like they've lowered them, so we'll keep going. So the ability then for children to make an appropriate choice is an absolutely essential ingredient in encouraging and promoting their ability to act responsibly. It's this ability that must be built up over time. Again, we need to give them that gift of time to allow them to perfect this practice, if you will, of making choices, to learn that impact of cause and effect, to see how the choices that they make leads to different effects or different outcomes so that they internalize how their behavior affects different things. So children need to then be allowed to exercise the ability or the freedom to choose frequently throughout the day, every single day, in order to develop this skill. The degree of freedom that a child can handle and the child's self-discipline really build together. They're kind of building blocks, one and of the same, right next to each other, if you will, throughout the 4 planes of development Dr. Montessori talked about. So a child at 0 to 6 in the first plane of development will have a lower level of self-discipline and will be able to handle a lower level of freedom than a child who's 6 to 9. And that child should have a lower level of self-discipline and a lower level of the freedom to choose than a child who's 9 to 12. And the same as than a child who's 12 to 15 and then 15 to 18, right? It's something that continues to grow and build over time. Essentially, in the beginning, especially that 0 to 6 age range, the child, you're helping them because Dr. Montessori talked about following the child, but as their leader. So as the parent, as the caregiver, as the educator, We're helping the child develop their sense of responsibility by offering them limited choices at first. So thinking about in the home environment, right? When they're, let's say, 3 to 6 years of age, maybe even a little earlier than that, depending on the child and their interests, you want to allow them the freedom to choose their outfit for the day. But opening the closet door or opening the drawer or showing them the entire basket that has all of their outfits is going to be overwhelming, and the child's going to have difficulty choosing. If you offer them 2 or 3 choices, you limit the number of choices they have, they're able to be more successful. I know we talked about this a little bit when it comes to that experience with nature, but something that comes up quite a bit is, well, what if the child chooses something that's not appropriate? Let's say it's really cold outside and they choose shorts instead of pants. Again, you're setting them up for success by offering them things that are appropriate, by giving them appropriate choices. However, let's say in a classroom setting, a child brings a jacket to school and it's, breezy outside, but not to the point that it's too cold that it's a safety concern if they don't have their jacket. You might ask them a prompting question, again, building that ability to choose, but also building that sense of cause and effect that leads to that internalization of personal responsibility. You might ask something like, I noticed it was a little breezy outside today. What do you think we might want to bring with us when we go outside to play? You're wanting them to come to that conclusion on their own, and then you're allowing them to choose, do I want to take my jacket or not? And if you've given them the reminder and then you go outside and they say they're cold, right? You can say, oh, we talked about what we might need to bring with us. I offered you the choice to bring your jacket with you. I bet tomorrow we'll bring our jacket if it's going to be, maybe tell them the temperature again tomorrow, or if the weather is the same. So again, obviously you don't want to put a child's safety at risk, but it's those situations, those teachable moments where they're given the freedom to choose, that they'll really have this really powerful learning experience and will internalize that sense of personal responsibility. Looking at the elementary age child specifically, so this is a child who's somewhere within the age of 6 to 12 here in the United States. That would be roughly first through sixth grade. So a large part of elementary and a little bit into what we consider middle school as well. Sixth grade is typically middle school. Interestingly, and this is a very different side point, Dr. Montessori advocated that child who's 12 years old, 11 turning 12, which typically is the first year of middle school, sixth grade, that they weren't quite ready for that transition yet, that they should still be the leader with younger children based on her planes of development. And it's been proposed that maybe that's why those children have some difficulty, especially socially and emotionally, and with the level of independence offered in a traditional middle school setting in the United States. With that aside, however, with the elementary child, those children who are 6 to 12 years old, we really want to appeal to what Dr. Montessori described as their reasoning mind. We need to explain the reasons why it's beneficial for them to develop this responsibility, to be responsible for certain things or in certain areas, and how those responsibilities lead to a well-functioning community. Remember, they're in that sensitive period for understanding their social relationships, for understanding their place in the world, for understanding morality and justice. So if you can help them understand how to be responsible, what those choices look like, and the reasons behind them, how it's going to impact their place in the world, their relationships with others, it really develops a sense of purpose for them. They understand why they need to be responsible or to exercise these responsibilities. If there are just rules or norms or responsibilities in place that were created without their input, they're going to want to know why. What are these rules for? Why should they adhere to them? Because they don't have any buy-in. So when possible with children that are this age, we really want to involve them in creating the rules and responsibilities, both at home and in the classroom, because that's what's going to create that buy-in. That's what's going to help children this age remain accountable for their actions and to help them hold their classmates or their siblings or us as the adults accountable as well, right? And that's that relationship that they're seeking. A lot of adults have this tendency to use the phrase, because I said, or because I told you so, or those are the rules. But just stating these things don't really explain why the rules exist. Why are things that way? And although there are situations when we just need children to be compliant, that's often when we're going to see some pushback, especially for the children in this plane of development between 6 to 12 years of age. So helping explain why, being proactive about that, helps these children develop a logical understanding of that same cause and effect that we said younger children will develop naturally through seeing how their actions lead to certain events. And then children of this age, by logically understanding the cause and effect, will then be able to apply their understandings to other similar situations that arise in the future, whether that's, again, in the classroom, in the home setting, or in the greater community. For example, we might say, we eat food at the table because that's the rule. Or we could say, we eat food at a table because it keeps the crumbs contained to one spot, and it's easier for you to clean up after yourself. And the person whose responsibility it is to sweep our classroom floor doesn't have to sweep the entire classroom. It makes their job a little easier as well. So now the child understands the reason. Oh, okay. We eat at a table because it's going to make things easier for me, and it's going to make things easier for my classmate when they're doing their job of sweeping the floor as well. They understand how it impacts themselves and how their actions impact others as well. So something that we, again, typically do as adults, because we see ourselves in this role of authority figure, is removing a child's freedom. So when they are engaging in different behaviors that we would prefer them not, we start to remove some of their freedoms or some of their privileges, if you will. We talk about rights and privileges, right? But it's important to know that taking away a child's freedom, taking away those privileges, doesn't make a child more responsible. That isn't to say that you shouldn't ever do so, right? There's certainly times when these types of effects, if you will, right? Cause and effect, these certain effects or consequences may need to be implemented. For instance, if a child is misusing a material or misusing something in the home or being destructive, maybe harmful to themselves or to other children, perhaps their freedom of movement or their freedom of choice might need to be restricted temporarily so that they're able to be kept safe. Other children or other people in the environment are kept safe. And the environment as a whole and the materials within it are kept safe, whether that's the classroom, the home, or the greater community setting. However, children don't develop a sense of responsibility without practice. So while in the moment, you may need to address a certain situation more immediately, you want to try to avoid taking away a freedom without thinking about pathways that it can be reintroduced. Responsibility doesn't just turn on like a light switch, right? It's more, it can be thought of more like a simmering pot of water or stew that slowly comes to a boil. That's how that responsibility is developed. So we need to offer children these teachable moments in order for that pot of water or stew to have those small moments of boiling to lead to a full simmering pot, right? A full boiling pot of water or of stew. And if we take away all those freedoms, we're taking away those teachable moments, those learning opportunities where that responsibility is really going to be developed. I've hinted towards this a little bit earlier in the presentation, but one of the most important things to remember is that responsibility is a process, and it comes about by affording the child time and opportunities to practice. In order to develop responsibility, children are going to need to have the freedom to make mistakes. And for us as adults, that might be challenging because those mistakes can often be messy, frustrating, maybe even annoying. So as a teacher, a caregiver, a parent, it can be tempting then to restrict freedoms, particularly after misuse or what we might refer to as misbehavior. But without giving children these opportunities to practice, they're likely going to fail to grow into the responsible adult that we hope they will one day become. Maria Montessori challenged us by saying, see the child who is not yet there, and offered that we should offer children these freedoms within these well-defined guidelines. That's that freedom within limits we were talking about, right? That help the child develop the responsibility as a byproduct of living and growing in this prepared Montessori home or classroom environment. So we're giving them freedom of movement. We're giving them the freedom to make choices because we've prepared this environment in which it's safe for them to do so within limits, right? So the ability to choose, along with giving children the freedom to choose, because that's a little different, right? Having the ability to do so, being able to choose. Think about, how we were talking about development and the 3 to 6 year old child maybe needing 2 to 3 choices, where an elementary age child could maybe choose between 4 to 5 or 5 to 6, and that would increase as the child grows. That's different than having the freedom to choose. So both of those things, the ability to choose along with the freedom to choose, side by side with the development of the child's will, the development of their self-discipline, independence, responsibility, and the wish to act responsibly as a member of one's social community, whether that's the home, the school, or the greater community. All of those things are tied together. So we need to offer children the freedom to choose, the ability to become independent, the ability to make mistakes so that they develop this personal responsibility, the ability to be free to socialize with their peers or with others out in the greater social community outside of the classroom or home setting as well, because that's where that responsibility is going to grow, because all of these things are intertwined. They're all impacting each other throughout the child's development. And Montessori, when properly implemented, when you use the idea of freedom within limits, when you involve children in establishing rights and responsibilities, when you allow children the freedom to choose, it's then that we create this total package, if you will, right? Where we're offering children situations and experiences where they can interact with their community, with the environment, and with others in a way that supports their normal development within this social context and leads to this goal that we all have, I believe, of a responsible and respectful human being. So as usual, I wanted to provide you with some additional resources if you're interested in learning more about fostering responsibility in a Montessori environment. And there are some resources here that focus on fostering responsibility both in the home and in the school setting. So if you're interested in learning more, I encourage you to take a look at some of these resources. I don't have anything here specifically from Dr. Montessori herself because she talks about responsibility throughout all of her texts. So any of Dr. Montessori's works that you read, you will see discussions about a lot of the topics we discussed today, right? The freedom within limits and giving children the freedom to choose, and how all of that leads to this development of responsibility. It's intertwined in her discussion of the planes of development, like we described. So any of her texts that you pick up, you will learn about her perspective on how to foster and promote responsibility in a Montessori way in Montessori classrooms or home settings. These are resources that are a little easier to access. So the first is Rising Tide Montessori. Rising Tide Montessori is a school, and it's also in another program for adult learners who are looking to receive their certification in Montessori studies. So they have a wonderful YouTube channel with a lot of really great content on different topics like defining what freedom and responsibility is in the Montessori pedagogy and philosophy, how to foster responsibility for different age children. They have one, again, specific to that elementary student, which is really important, considering how that age child is so focused on their relationship with their community, whether that's in the classroom, the home, or the larger social setting. And they even have a resource about what freedom and responsibility look like for us as the Montessori adults in the classroom. Guide and Grow also has some wonderful resources, different blogs and videos on topics like freedom within limits and how to encourage children to make choices. What do you do if they're not choosing? And these resources are particularly for children ages 0 to 3 and focused on the home setting. So that is a targeted focus for specific ages and location of where those different facets would be implemented. There are also some really wonderful resources through Trillium Montessori and Mainly Montessori. So Trillium Montessori is another wonderful offers a lot of training and professional development for educators and parents and caregivers who are looking to learn more about Montessori. But they also have a lot of free content as well. There's lots of blogs that are really well written through Trillium Montessori and Mainly Montessori about the topic of responsibility, freedom within limits. And Mainly Montessori is developed by a former Montessori classroom teacher who is now a Montessori homeschooling parent. And her name is Pilar Bewley. She's just incredible. She's a wealth of knowledge. And she has a really great blog on the topic of fostering responsibility. And I think it's a really great perspective because it's a unique one in that it looks at the Montessori homeschool approach specifically. So that might be something that's of interest to some of you all as well. So I know we're a little shorter on time today, so I tried to end a little more quickly. I know we do need to close no later than the top of the hour at 11 o'clock my time, so in about a little less than 20 minutes. But before I open it up to final questions, I did want to say thank you so much once again for being here. I have my contact information listed, my email address is there, my LinkedIn profile if you have a LinkedIn account and would like to follow along there. And I would also love you all to check out my website and my social media accounts. I have an Instagram and a Facebook page where I share a lot of the blogs that I've written, along with a lot of other wonderful resources from other Montessorians, other educators, and social media influencers in the parenting and education sphere. And you might find a lot of that content helpful as well. So my social media handle is at Montessori.matters if you would like to follow along on any of those platforms.